The story of the Rothschild family is one of the most fascinating examples of how influence and wealth can be built from almost nothing. It all began with a man named Mayer Amschel Rothschild in the 18th century. He was not a king, not a noble, and not born into wealth. In fact, he grew up in modest conditions in Frankfurt, Germany, but what he did have was intelligence, vision, and a deep understanding of money and trade. Mayer started as a small coin dealer and banker. Over time, he built trust with powerful clients, including princes and rulers. But his greatest strategy was something no one had done before. He expanded his business across Europe through his 5 sons. For those who are genuinely interested in the world of business, this video will be a true eye-opener. It will reveal how a person with a true business mindset thinks, the unique way their mind operates, and the strategic maneuvers they employ. Now, many people also claim that the Rothschild family continues to control the entire world, even to this day. Furthermore, it is alleged that the Rothschild family possesses the power to steer the course of global finance in any direction they choose, whenever they wish. Such is the extent of their power. Many also assert that the Titanic did not sink accidentally, rather it was deliberately sunk. The theory suggests that the prominent figures aboard the ship were opposing certain initiatives that posed a threat to the interests of this family. Now, how much truth lies within these claims? Was the Rothschild family truly that powerful? And if so, how exactly did they amass such immense power? I will explain this to you with the utmost clarity and simplicity, as if I were explaining it to a 10th grade student. Ultimately, whether or not the Rothschild family actually controlled the entire world, or if these are merely elaborate conspiracy theories, is something we will thoroughly explore and understand throughout the course of this video. But one thing was certain: the Rothschild family knew exactly what was right and what wasn't for their business. He was born within a ghetto there. What exactly is a ghetto? The reality is that at the time of his birth, around 1744, the plight of the Jewish people was far from ideal. In fact, across all European nations, the situation for Jews was largely the same. They were allotted a specific street in which to live. Outside the confines of that street, they were permitted to roam only until 7 p.m. in the evening. After that time, they were forbidden from being outdoors. Furthermore, they were not allowed to venture out on Sundays, as Sunday was a day of rest and worship when people attended church. By now, you have likely understood why Jews in Europe were confined to living within these ghettos, because for thousands of years, a massive and pervasive propaganda had been waged against them. The emperors, the rulers of that era, who in a sense served the same function as modern-day politicians, would frequently utilize religion as a tool whenever they needed to rally the public. And what did this manipulation of religion entail? It meant instilling the belief in the minds of the people that the Jews were responsible for the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, and furthermore, that the Jews of the present day remained equally responsible for that act. In other words, even thousands of years later, the Jews were still held accountable. This propaganda was truly insidious, and given that people in those days were deeply religious and that modern amenities like social media did not exist, nor was there widespread public awareness, consequently, there existed a virulent level of hatred against Jews among the populace. Many people at the time likely viewed Jews as impure and did not want them to venture beyond their designated confines, especially not into churches. That was absolutely forbidden. It was in this very environment, within the Jewish ghetto of Frankfurt, Germany, that Mayer Amschel Rothschild was born. At that time, Jews were largely barred from engaging in business activities. Indeed, in most empires of that era, Jews were not even recognized as citizens of the very countries they inhabited. Naturally, if a person is not recognized as a citizen, they cannot purchase land. That is self-evident. They could not acquire property, nor could they establish a business, as they would be denied the necessary licenses. After all, if you do not possess official ID, how could you possibly obtain a business license? Consequently, Jewish commercial activity typically revolved around cash-based transactions, receiving payments in cash and making payments in cash, as a means of generating income. Only professions of this nature were viable options. Thus, Jews typically worked as bankers. In today's world, banker is a title of great significance. However, that was not the case back then. In that context, bankers simply meant an munim, an accountant or bookkeeper. This was someone who managed the financial accounts and assets of wealthy individuals, collecting incoming funds, balancing the books, and maintaining detailed records and ledgers. Jews performed all these tasks. Beyond that, some engaged in textile work, manufacturing and selling clothing. They would acquire old clothes from other sources, perhaps mending them here and there, and then resell them. In other words, it was the kind of work that generated cash flow, as that was the sole means by which they sustained their livelihood. Now, Mayer Amschel Rothschild, the man in question, was born with an extraordinary level of ambition. You could almost say it was his destiny. This man was simply meant to reach the very pinnacle of success. His family, too, was destined to rise to the top. As I mentioned earlier, nature possesses an inherent equilibrium. Anyone who has languished at the very bottom is bound one day to ascend to the very top. This is nature's intrinsic balance. So naturally, Mayer Amschel Rothschild, this man, also set his sights on becoming an accountant. He reasoned, if I am going to become an accountant, why not serve the most powerful individual within the empire? And who was the most powerful? The prince. At that time, Frankfurt fell under the dominion of an empire known as Hesse Castle. The reigning prince of the Hesse Castle Empire was Prince William. Mayer Amschel Rothschild devised a strategy. How could he gain access to the prince? He discovered that the prince harbored a deep fascination, specifically a keen interest in antique coins. Wealthy individuals, after all, are often drawn to the arts and collectibles. He meticulously curated a portfolio, gathering a collection of rare antique coins through sheer hard work, and presented it to Prince William. Now, back in those days, people weren't quite the sophisticated, gentlemanly types we see today. Consequently, that portfolio, the one presented to him, deeply touched Prince William. It truly resonated with him. He subsequently summoned him for a meeting. A conversation ensued and offered him a position, a job working directly alongside him. After all, Prince William was a prince. He owned vast properties and had many affairs to manage. Gradually, Mayer Amschel Rothschild set out to earn William's trust. His goal was to become one of his closest confidants, and for good reason, as there were tangible benefits to be gained. What were these benefits? Well, take the ghettos, for instance, those segregated quarters from which one wasn't even permitted to step out after 7 p.m. However, if you happened to be Prince William's steward or a trusted insider, you could remain outside the ghetto walls, for he was a prince. You would be granted special dispensations. You could even remain outside on Sundays. It was even conceivable that you could build your own home outside the ghetto boundaries. You would be accorded privileges and facilities covering all aspects of life. By this time, though, the animosity or propaganda directed against Jews had significantly waned. This sentiment had persisted for 2,000 years, but by now it had already lost much of its power. The world had moved on. The Jewish community no longer wielded significant power and in fact found themselves in a rather vulnerable position. So a very simple concept occurred to Mayer Amschel Rothschild. He realized that to become indispensable, he had to identify and solve the specific problems Prince William was grappling with. And at that time, Prince William indeed was grappling with a particular issue. His armies were frequently deployed to fight on behalf of other empires. The state of Hesse Castle, his domain, was not a vast empire. It certainly did not rival the British Empire, Napoleon's empire, or Napoleonic France. Consequently, he would send his armies to serve elsewhere. Now, if you're going to send your armies into battle, you are obliged to provide them with gold and silver. Why? Your castle coins, they are valid only within the castle itself. If they're heading out to fight alongside the British army, they require gold and silver. Because if one were to travel to another country, who knows where, the coins from Hesse Castle simply wouldn't be accepted. Once there, if you wished to buy food, drink, accommodation, or any other necessities, you wouldn't be able to do so using those coins. What they required instead was gold and silver. Consequently, Prince William faced a major issue.
While he would readily provide armies to the British Empire, receiving, of course, some form of compensation in return, the problem was that his reserves of gold and silver were dwindling. He was running out of these precious metals, and this shortage was becoming a significant issue. It was at this juncture that Mayer Amschel Rothschild exercised his ingenuity and devised a solution. He reasoned, coins are accepted within Hesse Castle, aren't they? So the people there don't actually need gold and silver for their daily transactions. Thus, he began collecting gold from the people of Hesse Castle and supplying it to Prince William. To Prince William, the form of the asset didn't matter in the slightest. You could give him any amount of gold, and it made no difference whether he held it as raw gold or as minted coins. In fact, gold and silver were arguably more valuable to him, as those were the very assets he would need to pay his armies when deploying them to foreign territories. This created a guaranteed demand coming directly from Prince William. With this guaranteed demand in place, Mayer Amschel Rothschild established a full-fledged business operation. His proposition was simple: bring me your gold, and in exchange, take these Hesse Castle coins. Within the Hesse Castle domain, these specific coins were highly practical and useful. After all, gold is prone to theft and comes with a host of associated security risks. Coins, on the other hand, are less of a liability. If one intended to remain within that specific territory, transacting in coins offered far greater convenience and advantage. Through this initiative, Mayer Amschel Rothschild first succeeded in earning Prince William's deep trust. They became quite close, in fact, because he had effectively resolved his pressing financial problem. Secondly, he had successfully built a highly lucrative business enterprise. In modern parlance, this is precisely what is known as front-running. In fact, most of the business terminology we use today was in one way or another either invented by Mayer Amschel Rothschild himself or by his family. While such practices may have existed prior to his time, it was he who was responsible for introducing them to the mainstream market. Front-running essentially involves sourcing a commodity from one place, thereby generating a profit on that initial transaction, and then reselling it elsewhere to earn a second profit. For instance, he would procure gold from various individuals, earning a profit on that acquisition, perhaps in the form of a commission or a small margin. He would then take that very same gold and sell it to Prince William, thereby generating a second stream of income, typically a commission of 7 to 8%. He amassed a substantial fortune through these dealings. However, it goes without saying that Mayer Amschel Rothschild could not have established his family as one of the world's most powerful dynasties based solely on these earnings. That much is obvious. It was at this juncture that a critical turning point emerged in his life. A persistent thought constantly occupied his mind. I am currently working with Prince William and earning a living. I am even enjoying considerable privileges and amenities. But what absolute guarantee is there that Prince William will remain a prince indefinitely? Europe, after all, was perpetually mired in a highly volatile geopolitical climate. By that time, the outbreak of war every 10 to 15 years had already become a commonplace occurrence. Consequently, if Prince William were to lose his title, for instance, if France were to launch an invasion and impose its own currency, the Jewish community, already barred from owning real estate, would find their accumulated wealth rendered worthless. The coins and currency they had painstakingly earned would become mere scrap. Furthermore, they didn't even retain physical possession of the gold and silver they traded, as these commodities were constantly being circulated for resale. It was at this moment that Mayer Amschel Rothschild's strategic mind went to work. Such is the nature of an ambitious individual. They are perpetually contemplating the future, asking themselves, what comes next? What should I do now? And constantly seeking new avenues and strategies to propel themselves further forward. From this point on, Mayer Amschel Rothschild dispatched his 5 sons to the capitals of 5 major empires: London, Vienna, and Naples. He kept his eldest son, the firstborn, right there in Frankfurt, and the 5th son, the youngest, was sent to Paris in France. Obviously, one reason was for security. The second reason was this: if working with Prince William was yielding such significant benefits, then surely the princes of the other empires would have the same needs, wouldn't they? They too would undoubtedly require gold and silver. So the strategy was to go there and apply the exact same methodology, cultivate close ties to their princes to ensure greater security. That way, if one empire were to collapse, another empire would still remain. However, when he sent his sons abroad, he established certain rules, formal protocols which are the very reason the Rothschild family has endured to this day. What were these formal rules? First, any business decision had to be made strictly within the family circle. Furthermore, any argument or dispute that arose within the family was never to be aired outside of it, no matter what. There was also a somewhat controversial rule. The women and daughters of the family were to be provided with a generous, substantial dowry, but they were not to become involved in the business. The female members would not participate in the business operations, nor would their husbands, the sons-in-law, be permitted to join. In essence, this meant that the Rothschild legacy would remain exclusively within the Rothschild line, passed down through his 5 sons and subsequently their male descendants thereafter. These were the extremely strict rules laid down by Mayer Amschel Rothschild. For his children, these rules eventually evolved into something more. They became, in a sense, a code of conduct for how to live their lives. They too never once violated these rules. Mayer Amschel Rothschild had one final rule. If any one of the 5 brothers were to earn a significant amount of money, generating substantial profits, for instance, that profit belonged to all 5 of them collectively. Conversely, if the 5 of them were to suffer a devastating financial loss, that loss was borne by everyone. It was not the burden of any single individual alone. Put simply, in modern parlance, the 5 brothers functioned essentially as shareholders of a single unified enterprise. Now, after these 5 individuals had left, they gradually began to implement the very same methodology that their father had employed. Specifically, they started cultivating relationships with Prince William. And this development actually worked to Prince William's advantage as well. In fact, the technical details of how this benefited him will become clear to you later. The major turning point for this family arrived in 1803. Napoleon began declaring war upon various empires. Now, what exactly were the Napoleonic Wars? You don't need to delve into excessive detail to understand this. Simply imagine that France was launching attacks across the other empires across Europe. France was a formidable power, and significantly, it was not itself an empire. The movement in France had originated from the premise that everyone is equal. There are no princes, queens, or kings belonging to an empire. Everyone stands on equal footing. Equality must reign supreme. Following this principle, a bureaucracy and a government were to be established, and all decisions and judgments were to be rendered based on the fundamental premise of universal equality. There was no room for distinctions. No nobles, no slaves, no weak, no Jews, and so on. Everyone was equal. Napoleon was the man leading this new France, and he commanded a formidable army. So when France declared war upon the various empires, it marked a critical turning point in history. For in 1806, precisely what Mayer Amschel Rothschild had anticipated came to pass. The man was a true visionary. He had foreseen the possibility that Prince William could be attacked at any moment, and that is exactly what happened. Napoleon launched an attack against him, forcing Prince William to flee the region. However, by the time Prince William was compelled to make his escape, Mayer Amschel Rothschild had already established himself as an indispensable and highly trusted confidant. And those 2 to 3 million pounds, he handed them over to Mayer Amschel before fleeing, entrusting him with the instruction, "Safeguard my property and my money. I will return someday."
Mayer Amschel Rothschild did not keep this money for himself. Instead, he distributed it among his other sons. One of these sons was Nathan Rothschild, who had gone to London. He was the most aggressive and ambitious of the lot, a true chip off the old block, perhaps even more formidable than his father. It was to this man that the largest share of the funds was allocated. The reason for this was, once again, that Mayer Amschel Rothschild was a true visionary. He realized that once Napoleon declared war against the various empires, those other empires would automatically mobilize to defeat him, foremost among them being the British Empire. And that is precisely what came to pass. When Napoleon initiated the war in 1803, the British Empire formally declared war on France in 1805. Events unfolded exactly as Mayer Amschel Rothschild had foreseen through his visionary insight. Now, he was well aware that the British Empire was a formidable power. You see, every business venture entails risk, and the Rothschild family embraced that risk wholeheartedly. They were not afraid of incurring losses. Their sole objective was to ensure they were positioned on the winning side. They knew, and Mayer Amschel Rothschild in particular knew, that the British Empire would not be defeated by France. It is an incredibly formidable empire, immensely powerful. While it certainly wouldn't lose, a victory wasn't guaranteed either. Why was this the case? Because to defeat France, the British Empire couldn't simply confine the fighting to its own immediate vicinity. It would have to venture into every territory that France had occupied. In fact, it would need to penetrate deep into France itself in order to defeat Napoleon. Rothschild understood this crucial point. When the soldiers of the British Empire marched out to fight, the armies of that era were not composed solely of British subjects. They included foreign contingents as well. For instance, troops might be provided by Hesse Castle, or armies might be arriving from other regions, forces belonging to other empires, or frequently mercenaries. These mercenaries and armies fought primarily for financial gain. By this period, a sense of loyalty toward the empire itself had largely diminished within these military ranks. Thus, it was abundantly clear to him that when the British Empire's forces, specifically these hired armies and mercenaries, were engaged in combat within or around France, they would require funds. And not just money in a general sense, they would require gold and silver. This was because British currency would be rendered useless within France and the surrounding empires. Local vendors in those regions would simply refuse to accept it. Furthermore, wars of that magnitude often dragged on for years. Consequently, the soldiers fighting on foreign soil would absolutely require gold and silver to sustain themselves and survive. It was for this very reason that he dispatched his 5 sons abroad, sons who began amassing gold even before the war had officially commenced. Moreover, the network established by these 5 brothers already spanned across the major capital cities of Europe. At the same time, the youngest of the brothers, James Rothschild, had already established his own bank in Paris. He had already set up the Paris branch of the Rothschilds Bank. And what was the advantage of this bank? When British army soldiers or mercenaries were fighting there, the British Empire would, naturally, attempt to pay them in British currency. Consequently, the soldiers would find themselves holding British currency, which France would not accept. Therefore, James Rothschild's bank would acquire this currency at discounted rates, for instance, taking 100 units of British currency in exchange for a value equivalent to only 50, 60, or 70 units. Located in Paris, France, James' bank operated while the British Empire's soldiers were engaged in combat. It accepted the currency that no one else across France was willing to accept, and for good reason. It was not their national currency. Furthermore, the war was far from over. If the British Empire were to suffer defeat, what utility would their currency hold within France? James Rothschild would accept this currency into his bank and, utilizing the networks of his 5 brothers, channel it back to Nathan Rothschild in London. And in London, that currency was extremely beneficial. It was perfectly usable. Simultaneously, as Nathan Rothschild accumulated increasingly large sums of money acquired at discounted rates, he also incorporated the funds received from his father, money which ultimately had originated, albeit indirectly, from Prince William. With these combined funds, Nathan Rothschild began purchasing gold in substantial quantities. This strategy unfolded at a time when British currency had become useless for the soldiers neither within France itself nor in the surrounding empires during the ongoing war. The British Empire's forces were at that time under the command of the Duke of Wellington. So, the Duke of Wellington made it explicitly clear that while we might defeat France, we would ultimately be defeated by the plight of our own soldiers if we did not receive sufficient gold and silver. After all, a human being cannot simply go hungry for years on end. Why would soldiers fight for you if you cannot provide you with gold and silver? Your existing currency, after all, is proving to be of no practical use. It was at this juncture, with the assistance of his 5 brothers, that Nathan Rothschild transferred gold worth millions of euros to the Duke of Wellington and, by extension, the British Empire, utilizing his own transport infrastructure and extensive network. By this time, the five brothers had successfully established their own networks. It really isn't that difficult. If you reside in a specific location for 15 years and focus on building connections within a single city, you can realistically cover a radius of at least 100, 150, or even 200 kilometers. The networks these five brothers created were incredibly sophisticated, utilizing everything from ships to horse-drawn carriages to carrier pigeons, yes, even pigeons, to facilitate their operations. Whether the objective was to transmit information, supply gold, or deliver any other commodity, the five brothers ensured a continuous flow of supplies across the entire European continent. Nathan Rothschild provided such a massive quantity of gold to the British Empire, specifically to the Duke of Wellington, that this very gold became the decisive factor enabling the British Empire to defeat France and Napoleon in the War of 1815. However, the story does not end there. Naturally, once the war concluded, the Rothschild family experienced an exponential surge in their wealth. After all, while supplying the gold, they were simultaneously earning commissions and collecting interest. Moreover, their standing in the eyes of the British Empire and the trust placed in them reached an all-time high. The Rothschilds evolved into such a powerhouse that it became virtually unthinkable, even for governments, to proceed without seeking their counsel or advice. To do otherwise would have been considered sheer folly. Their involvement extended beyond just merely supplying gold and managing currency circulation. By that time, government bonds had also come into existence. What exactly are government bonds? Let me explain it in simple terms. Whenever a government needs funds, whether for developmental projects or for financing a war, it issues a public appeal. For example, imagine a government needs £1 million. It might issue 10 bonds, each valued at £100,000. 10 individuals could each invest £100,000. In return, the government promises to repay the full amount after a fixed period, say 5 years. During that time, it also pays regular interest, providing investors with a steady income. This is how bonds work. As the war progressed, the Rothschild family began investing heavily in bonds and trading them on a large scale. Using the same powerful network they had built for transporting gold, they expanded their financial operations across Europe. Nathan Rothschild became especially skilled in the movement of gold, supplying it efficiently between countries such as Britain, Portugal, and France. One of the key reasons for this expertise was the fact that Jewish communities were dispersed across the entirety of Europe. Moreover, the Jewish people did not possess a nation-state of their own at that time. Consequently, they were not fighting on behalf of any specific side in the war. It made no difference to them who emerged victorious and who did not. At the same time, I would like to clarify another point regarding the Rothschild family. There is a common narrative, often framed as either a remarkable achievement or a shadowy conspiracy, suggesting that the Rothschilds represent a nexus of immense Jewish power, specifically that the Rothschild family was instrumental in aiding the establishment of Israel, and undertook all these actions primarily for the benefit of the Jewish people. However, in reality, it was Napoleon, that is to say, France, who was championing the cause of equal rights. Specifically, equal rights for everyone, a category that naturally included the Jewish population. Thus, the individual who was truly fighting for the rights of the Jewish people at that time was in fact Napoleon. Under the other empires of the era, Jewish communities were typically confined, living within ghettos. Therefore, the notion that the Rothschild family undertook all these actions solely for the sake of the Jewish people, or that there was some grand Jewish machination behind it all, is not accurate. They certainly provided significant assistance to Israel at a later stage, but that is a topic we shall discuss further on. Now, regarding the dynamics of government bonds, if a government were to attempt to sell its bonds directly to its own citizens, the process would be a gradual one. It would inevitably take a considerable amount of time. There's quite a bit of intricate maneuvering involved. The Rothschild family typically inserted itself right into the middle of this process. Whenever the government needed to sell its bonds, the Rothschild family would purchase them all in one fell swoop, handing over the funds to the government. This arrangement benefited the government as well. The government received its funds very quickly. It was a fantastic outcome for them. Subsequently, the Rothschild family would gradually sell off those bonds. Moreover, they executed these sales in a manner calculated to ensure they reaped the maximum possible profit. For instance, during the final confrontation of the Napoleonic Wars, what is known as the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, when Napoleon was defeated, the Rothschild family, specifically Nathan Rothschild, received news of the British Empire's victory several hours before the official news even reached Britain. Why? Because the very same network they used to supply gold could also be utilized to transmit information, and they could do so far more rapidly than official government channels. Within their network, they employed everything from carrier pigeons to horses. Consequently, when news reached them ahead of everyone else, they and they alone knew precisely when to buy and sell their bonds. They might even choose not to sell the bonds at all, but rather hold on to them. After all, if the British Empire emerged victorious, the value of British currency would inevitably soar. So why sell them? Simply hold on to them and reap substantial profits. The Rothschild family experienced such explosive, exponential growth that there is absolutely no doubt they became one of the wealthiest families in the entire world. At the same time, they evolved into a family where the sheer accumulation of wealth became secondary. What truly began to matter was control. How did they exercise this control? They were the ones who decided who would receive loans. For instance, they extended loans amounting to millions of dollars to Austria. In France, the Paris branch of the Rothschild family played a pivotal role in helping to rebuild the nation. They provided millions of dollars in loans to numerous empires and countries. They had already reached this extraordinary level of influence. And naturally, when an entity extends a loan to a government, it comes with certain stipulations, certain terms and conditions. The reality is that these conditions, while one might hesitate to call it control over governments, were very real. After all, if you're conducting business and lending money to someone, you're bound to set certain conditions of your own. Their influence was literally so profound that they could compel governments to accede to their demands, insisting that their loans be accepted strictly on their terms. The story of Nathan Rothschild and the Battle of Waterloo is one of the most famous and debated moments in financial history. In 1815, communication was slow. News from the battlefield could take days to reach cities like London, but the Rothschild family had built a fast private network, using couriers, horses, and even pigeons. Because of this, Nathan Rothschild reportedly received news of Napoleon Bonaparte's defeat before the British government and the public. According to the popular story, instead of announcing the victory, Nathan acted strategically. He quietly began selling his government bonds in the London market. Seeing this, other investors panicked, assuming Britain had lost the war, so they started selling too. This caused prices in the London stock market to fall sharply. At that moment, when prices were extremely low, Nathan Rothschild secretly bought large amounts of these assets. Soon after, the official news arrived. Britain had won. Confidence returned and the market surged. The value of those bonds rose rapidly, and Nathan Rothschild won a massive profit. However, it's important to note, historians debate how accurate this story is. While the Rothschilds did have faster information and were highly influential, the dramatic market manipulation version may be partly exaggerated over time. Be sure to share this video with that friend of yours who aspires to earn a lot of money and has a keen interest in the business world. I hope you now understand the incredible journey of the Rothschild family, from humble beginnings to becoming one of the most powerful and wealthiest families in the world. If you found this video helpful, please support the channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Your support really motivates me to create more content like this. Also, feel free to drop your suggestions or topics in the comments. I'd love to make videos based on what you want to see next. This video took a lot of research and time to create, so your support truly means a lot. Thank you for watching.